During Grandma Beatrice's will reading, my cousin Zoe stood up and pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. She said, "She doesn't deserve a penny." Everyone in the room nodded in agreement, their faces set in grim satisfaction. They thought this was the end of me. But then, Mr. Sterling, the estate lawyer, smiled a thin, dangerous smile. He looked at Zoe, then at my Uncle Gregory, and said 7 words that changed everything. Actually, she left everything to the one who helped her catch the thief in this family. Then he pulled out a laptop and connected it to the main screen. He clicked a file labeled security footage. The room went silent. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. To understand the silence that fell over the library, you have to understand the noise of the last 3 years. While my cousin Zoe was busy curating her aesthetic in Milan and Uncle Gregory was burning through venture capital on failed tech startups, I was here, every weekend. For 36 months straight. I wasn't drinking tea and making polite conversation. I was working. Grandma Beatrice wasn't just a grandmother. She was a historian, a collector, and a woman who understood the value of preservation. Her library wasn't just a room with shelves. It was a collection of rare manuscripts and first editions valued at over $1.2 million. And it was chaotic. So, I became the archivist. I treated our relationship like a professional contract where the currency was respect, not money. I wore white cotton gloves. I built a digital database from scratch. I documented provenance, condition, and estimated market value for every single item in that brownstone. I knew the difference between a water stain and a chemical burn. I knew which spine was cracking and which one needed climate control. To Zoe and Gregory, this room was just a liquidation sale waiting to happen. To me, it was a fortress of history that needed a guard. They hated me for it. And for a long time, I made the mistake of thinking they hated me because they thought I was trying to curry favor or that I was a suck-up. But as I stood there listening to Zoe scream about a black market ledger, I realized the truth was much colder. It is a concept called narcissistic injury. They didn't hate me because I was bad. They hated me because I was a mirror. My quiet, consistent labor was a constant, glaring reflection of their own negligence. Every time I cataloged a book, I was highlighting the fact that they hadn't visited in months. Every time I preserved a piece of history, I was exposing their desperate need to sell it for quick cash. My competence was an insult to their entitlement. I made them feel small, inadequate, and exposed without ever saying a word. And people like Zoe and Gregory cannot survive feeling small. They have to destroy the mirror to stop seeing the reflection. That is why they framed me. It wasn't enough to just kick me out. They needed to destroy my reputation. They needed to turn the perfect archivist into a common thief so they could reclaim the moral high ground. If I was a criminal, then their greed was justified. If I was a fraud, then their neglect didn't matter. They built this entire lie, planted a fake ledger in my bag, and staged this public execution just to soothe their own egos. I looked at Zoe, her chest heaving with fake outrage, and I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, detached clarity. I had spent 3 years cataloging the past, but I had missed the most important entry. I hadn't realized that while I was preserving books, I was also documenting the decay of my own family. But Grandma Beatrice had seen it all. She had been watching, and she had prepared a final entry for the archives that none of them were expecting. Panic is a disorder of the unprepared. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the mahogany table, treating Zoe's hysteria like environmental noise irrelevant to the data at hand. I looked at Mr. Sterling. He looked back at me, his expression unreadable, a perfect mask of legal neutrality. But I saw the slight nod. The signal. It was time. Mr. Sterling didn't argue with Zoe. He didn't tell her to sit down or lower her voice. He let her scream herself hoarse about integrity and family values, while he calmly connected his laptop to the library's main display screen. The large monitor flickered to life, casting a harsh blue light across the room. He navigated through a series of folders until he found one simply labeled The Sting. He double-clicked, The video began to play. It wasn't the grainy, black and white security footage you see in movies. It was high definition, crystal clear, with perfect audio. The timestamp in the corner read 3 weeks ago. The scene was this very library, and the stars of the show were Zoe and Uncle Gregory. On screen, they were huddled over my work bag, which I had left near the door while I was in the archives. Gregory was looking around nervously, wiping sweat from his forehead, while Zoe was busy stuffing something inside the side pocket. It was a ledger, a fake, leather-bound book designed to look like a black market sales record. "Hurry up," Gregory hissed on the recording, his voice trembling. "If she comes back, the whole plan is ruined." "Relax," Zoe sneered, her voice dripping with the same arrogance she was displaying right now. "The little mouse is too busy dusting old maps. She won't notice a thing. Once the police find this, she'll be out on the street, and we can finally liquidate this dusty old collection. I already have a buyer for the first editions." The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the hard drive. On screen, they laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was the cruel, self-satisfied laughter of people who believed they were untouchable. They zipped up my bag, high-fived, and walked out of the frame, congratulating themselves on their brilliance. Zoe stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her face drained of color, leaving her makeup standing out in stark, garish relief. She looked from the screen to me, then back to the screen, desperation clawing at her throat. "That's fake," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "That's a deep fake. You doctored that footage." Grandma was senile. She didn't know how to use a computer, let alone set up a camera system like this. "You manipulated her." I almost smiled. She still didn't get it. She thought this was about technology. She didn't realize it was about character. She thought she was fighting a tech-savvy grandmother, but she was actually fighting a woman who had spent her entire life studying the past to protect the future. And history, as they say, is written by the victors. Or in this case, recorded by them. Mr. Sterling didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply closed the laptop with a sharp snap that cut through Zoe's hysteria like a guillotine blade. The sound echoed off the high ceilings, bouncing around the shelves of leather-bound history that surrounded us. Zoe flinched. Gregory froze, his eyes darting to the door as if calculating the distance to his car. "Let us put aside the video for a moment," Mr. Sterling said, his voice level and devoid of warmth. He opened a physical file on the table, the paper crisp and white against the dark wood. "Let us discuss the inventory. Specifically, the first edition of The Great Gatsby and the 17th century Celestial Atlas that you removed from this room 3 weeks ago, the items you sold to a private buyer in New York for $42,000. "We didn't sell anything," Gregory blurted out, sweat beading on his upper lip. We were securing assets. We were worried about theft." "Securing assets," Sterling repeated, tasting the words as if they were spoiled milk. "Is that what you call a cash transaction in a hotel lobby with an unregistered buyer? Because according to the wire transfer records I have here, the money didn't go into the estate trust. It went into a newly opened offshore account under the name Zoe Chen Enterprises." Zoe's face contorted. "So what? It's our inheritance anyway. We just took an advance. Grandma was hoarding all this wealth while I was struggling to build my brand. It's not fair. Those books were worth a fortune, and she just let them gather dust." "Worth a fortune," Sterling said, and for the first time, a glimmer of genuine amusement danced in his eyes. He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of shared knowledge pass between us. He turned back to Zoe. "That is the fascinating part, Miss Chen. You see, your grandmother was not senile. She was suspicious. She noticed gaps on the shelves months ago. She realized her legacy was being slowly cannibalized by her own kin." He pulled a second document from the folder. It looked like an invoice from a printing company. "Beatrice didn't want to accuse you without proof," Sterling continued, his voice dropping an octave, forcing them to lean in. "So, 6 months ago, she commissioned a specialist in London, a master of reproduction. She had high-quality facsimiles created for the 12 most valuable items in her collection. She placed the copies on the shelves and moved the originals to a climate-controlled vault in Zurich. The silence that followed was heavy, crushing. I watched the realization wash over Gregory first. His mouth fell open, his face draining of blood until he looked like a ghost. Zoe was shaking her head, a slow, jerky motion of denial. "No," she whispered. That's impossible." The buyer verified them. He checked the bindings. "The buyer," Sterling said, delivering the final blow with surgical precision, "wasn't a collector. He was a private investigator hired by this firm. He wasn't checking the bindings for authenticity, Zoe. He was checking them to see if you were foolish enough to sell them. And you were." I looked at the empty shelves where the stolen books had been. My grandmother hadn't just protected her assets, she had weaponized them. She had turned their greed into the very instrument of their destruction. They hadn't stolen a fortune. They had stolen paper and ink worth less than a few $100s. But in doing so, they had sold their souls for a price that didn't even exist. It wasn't just a trap, it was a master class in human nature. Beatrice knew they couldn't resist the bait. She knew they would never bother to open the books and read them. They only cared about the cover. And that shallowness had just cost them everything. The room didn't just feel silent anymore. It felt heavy, as if the air pressure had dropped before a storm. Zoe had stopped screaming. She was slumped against the bookshelf, staring at the floor, her mind likely racing through every interaction she had ever had with Grandma Beatrice, trying to pinpoint the moment she had been made. Uncle Gregory looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. But Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. He reached into his briefcase one last time and pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. "Beatrice left this," he said, his voice softer now, lacking the sharp edge of the legal proceedings. "She asked me to read it only if the trap was sprung. She was very specific about that condition. She said, 'If the books remain on the shelves, burn this letter. If they are gone, read it to the family.'" He broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper was deafening in the quiet room. He unfolded the letter, smoothing the crease with a reverence that told me he had loved her, too. "My family," Sterling read, speaking with a cadence that sounded hauntingly like my grandmother. "If you are hearing this, it means you have failed. It means that given the choice between preserving our history and selling it for parts, you chose the sale. I am writing this with a broken heart, not a vengeful one. For the last year, I have watched you. I watched you look at my library and see only dollar signs. I watched you look at your cousin Savannah and see only an obstacle. I felt tears prick my eyes. She had seen everything. All those weekends when I thought she was napping in her chair, she had been observing the dynamic, the cruelty, the greed. I did not set this trap to catch you," the letter continued. "I set it hoping it would remain empty. I commissioned the facsimiles and left them out in the open, not as bait, but as a final mercy. I wanted to give you one last chance to walk into this room, see something valuable, and choose to leave it be. I prayed every night that Mr. Sterling would never have to open this file. I prayed that my suspicions were just the paranoia of an old woman. But I am a historian. I deal in facts, not wishes. And the fact is, you have looked at this family not as a legacy to protect, but as a carcass to feast upon." Zoe let out a small, choked sob. It wasn't an apology. It was the sound of a child realizing the parent they thought they had fooled had actually been watching them the entire time. "I cannot leave my life's work to vultures," Sterling read, his eyes meeting Gregory's. "I cannot entrust the past to people who have no concept of the future. The library, the estate, and the trust are not rewards for sharing my DNA. They are tools for preservation. Therefore, if the books are gone, so is your inheritance. You have sold your birthright for $42,000. I hope it was enough." Sterling lowered the letter. "There is a postscript," he added, turning to me. "To Savannah, my silent watchman. I am sorry I could not protect you from their nature, but I could protect you from their schemes. You never asked for anything. Yet you gave me everything. You are the only one who understood that the true value of a book is not the price on the cover, but the words inside. Do not let them make you feel guilty for their sins. You were the only one who passed the test, because you were the only one who didn't know you were taking it. I leaned back against the heavy oak table, the wood cool against my palms. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a tragedy. This entire time, while Zoe and Gregory were plotting and scheming, treating Grandma like a senile obstacle, she had been agonizing over this decision. She hadn't wanted to cut them off. She had given them a physical test of character, a literal object lesson, hoping against hope that they would prove her wrong. This trap wasn't born of malice. It was born of a grandmother's grief. She had given them the rope, praying they wouldn't use it to hang themselves, but they had tightened the noose with their own hands. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a horrifying click. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, his tone shifting from mournful to official. Now, we must address the legal ramifications. You see, the sale of the facsimiles is not a simple misunderstanding, it is a felony. Zoe looked up. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks. But they were fakes, she cried, grasping at straws. We didn't actually steal anything valuable. You said so yourself. It was just paper. Intent, Miss Chen, Sterling said, leaning forward. The law cares about intent. You entered this house with the intent to steal property you believed to be worth over $40,000. You engaged in a transaction to sell that property. You accepted money for it. That is attempted grand larceny and fraud. The fact that the items were fake only means you defrauded the buyer as well as the estate. But the buyer was you, Gregory argued, his voice rising in panic. You hired him. It was a setup. Entrapment applies to law enforcement. Mr. Chen, Sterling corrected him coolly. I am a private attorney, executing the wishes of a private citizen, and the police officers waiting in the foyer are very interested in the wire fraud aspect of your little transaction. Crossing state lines to sell stolen goods? That makes it federal. Zoe's composure shattered completely. She dropped to her knees, not metaphorically, but literally. She crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my dress. Savannah, please. You can't let them arrest us. We're family. I'm your cousin. We grew up together. Tell him to stop. Tell him it was just a mistake. I looked down at her. This was the girl who had spent the last decade making fun of my clothes, my job, my quiet life. This was the girl who had just tried to frame me for a crime I didn't commit. And now, stripped of her filters and her followers, she was just a terrified child who had finally been told no. Family? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. You didn't treat me like family when you planted that ledger in my bag. You didn't treat me like family when you stood up in front of everyone and called me a thief. You were ready to send me to prison, Zoe. You were ready to ruin my entire life, just to buy a few more handbags. Uncle Gregory stepped forward, trying to use his size to intimidate. But he just looked deflated. Savannah, be reasonable. Think about the scandal. Think about the family name. Your grandmother wouldn't want us in jail. My grandmother, I said, feeling a surge of strength I didn't know I had, left me a letter specifically telling me not to let you guilt me. She knew exactly who you were. She gave you a choice. Gregory, you chose the money. Now you have to pay the bill. I turned to Mr. Sterling. The power in the room had shifted completely. It wasn't with the loud, flashy influencers anymore. It was with the quiet girl who knew where the bodies were buried, or in this case, where the books were shelved. Uncle Gregory looked from Mr. Sterling to me, his face a map of calculation and regret. He licked his lips, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. Then he tried the only move he had left. He tried to bargain. Look, we can fix this, he said, his voice wheedling, the desperation bleeding through. Savannah, think about what you're doing. We're your only family. Beatrice is gone. If you send us to prison, you'll be completely alone. Who's going to help you manage the estate? Who's going to be there for holidays? We made a mistake, okay? A huge mistake. But we can pay back the $42,000. Zoe has connections. I have prospects. Just tell Sterling to drop it. We'll sign whatever you want. We'll walk away from the inheritance. Just don't let them arrest us. He was using the oldest weapon in the family arsenal, fear of isolation. He was banking on the fact that I had always been the quiet one, the one who craved connection, the one who tolerated their abuse just to have a seat at the table. He thought the threat of being an orphan was enough to make me fold. I studied his face, cataloging the sweat on his brow and the tremor in his hands. Then, my attention shifted to the empty leather chair near the fireplace. The leather was worn in the shape of a person who had spent decades reading, thinking, and planning. Beatrice hadn't left me alone. She had left me surrounded by the greatest minds in history. She had left me a purpose. And in that empty chair, I saw the ghost of her strength. She hadn't hesitated to set this trap because she knew that protecting the future sometimes meant amputating the past. I realized then that family wasn't about who you shared blood with. It was about who you shared values with. They were parasites, feeding off the host until there was nothing left. If I let them go, they would just find another host. They would drain someone else dry. Protecting the archive meant removing the threat, permanently. I turned back to Mr. Sterling. The air in the room was electric, poised on the edge of a precipice. Gregory was holding his breath. Zoe was sobbing quietly into her hands. They were waiting for me to be the nice girl, the quiet girl, the girl who fixed things. Proceed as instructed, I said. My voice didn't shake. It was cold, final, and absolute. Mr. Sterling nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. He pressed a button on his phone. The heavy oak doors of the library swung open, and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a plainclothes detective. They didn't need to ask who the suspects were. The guilt was written on Zoe and Gregory's faces in sweat and tears. Gregory Chen, Zoe Chen, the detective said, stepping forward with handcuffs already in hand. You are under arrest for fraud, attempted grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Zoe screamed as they pulled her up, a raw animal sound of disbelief. Gregory just slumped, defeated, letting them lead him away without a fight. They were marched out of the library, past the shelves they had tried to rob, past the history they had tried to sell. I stood there and watched them go. I didn't look away. I watched until the heavy front door closed behind them with a definitive thud, sealing the silence back into the house. I was alone in the library. Just me, Mr. Sterling, and 1,000 stories watching from the walls. But for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. The brownstone doesn't smell like stagnation and secrets anymore. Today, it smells like bookbinder's glue, fresh coffee, and the specific, dusty warmth of old paper being turned by new hands. It has been 6 months since the police escorted my family out of this foyer, and in that time, I haven't just renovated a house, I have rebuilt a legacy. The bronze plaque outside now reads the Beatrice and Savannah Archive. It is open to the public 3 days a week. Right now, I am standing at the head of the long mahogany table, the same table where Mr. Sterling read the will, teaching a workshop on restoration to 12 students who look at these books with the same reverence I do. Zoe and Gregory are currently awaiting trial. I hear through the grapevine that they are blaming each other, cannibalizing their own relationship in a desperate bid for a plea deal. I don't follow the news. I don't check their social media. I don't visit them. Their chaos is no longer my inheritance. People often think that revenge is about destruction. They think it is about burning down the enemy's house, salting the earth, and standing atop the ash heap. But as I watch a young student carefully repair the spine of a 19th century botanical guide, I realize that view is too small. Destruction is easy. Any fool with a match can burn a library. True revenge is construction. It is taking the very thing they wanted to liquidate for quick cash and turning it into a fortress that they can never touch. It is using the $3.36 million not to buy status symbols that rust and fade, but to endow a foundation that will outlive us all. My success is the ultimate verdict on their failure. Every book I save is a testament to the fact that they were wrong. Every student I teach is a guarantee that their greedy, short-sighted worldview dies with them. Grandma Beatrice knew this. That is why she left me the work, not just the reward. She knew that the only way to truly defeat a parasite is to make the host so strong, so vibrant, and so purposeful that there is no room left for the infection to take hold. I walk over to the empty leather chair by the fireplace. It isn't empty anymore. It is occupied by a stack of restored manuscripts waiting to be catalogued. I run my hand along the leather. I don't need to speak to her to know she is here. She is in the quiet hum of the climate control system. She is in the sunlight hitting the spine of the Gatsby First Edition, safe behind UV-protected glass. She is in the peace that has finally settled over this house. I didn't just inherit a fortune, I inherited a duty, and looking around at the life I have built from the ashes of their betrayal, I know I have finally balanced the ledger. If you believe that integrity is the only legacy worth leaving, hit that like button and share this story. And tell me in the comments, what is the most valuable thing you've ever preserved? I'll be reading your stories.